Hello, and welcome to the Armenian News Network Groong Week in Review for December 1, 2024. Today we're talking with Benyamin Poghosyan. Hello, Benyamin. Welcome to the show.
Welcome, Benjamin.
Hello, Asbed. Hello, Hovik. As always, thanks for having me, and it's really a pleasure to be with you.
Thanks for being with us. Okay, the long ballyhooed PR stunt that was COP29 in Baku came and went with November. Last year, following COP28 in Dubai, Armenia chose not to veto Azerbaijan's bid to host COP29, allowing its proposal to be accepted. Despite some nations not attending the conference, others sending only low-level representatives, and even global activist Greta Thunberg contributing to the awareness-raising campaign against Azerbaijan about its horrible human rights record, its ethnic cleansing of Artsakh, and its dictatorship, Azerbaijan ultimately claimed that the event was a success. Benjamin, what was your overall impression of COP29, and do you think that Aliyev achieved what he was hoping to get out of it?
Thanks, Asbed. I believe Aliyev partly reached what he hoped for, because from my understanding, the key for President Aliyev was continue his efforts to put Azerbaijan in the front for the supporter of the global south, or the channel through which developing countries can project their wishes or their concerns. And from this perspective, if we watch how many times President Aliyev and also other Azerbaijani officials criticize the developed countries, criticize the West for different reasons, but also emphasizing that West should do more to help developing countries to cope with these climate change issues. I think from this perspective, probably this was a good advertisement for Azerbaijan. And again, let's not forget that Azerbaijan's policy is to slowly transform Azerbaijan from small state to something like, if not a middle power, but at least something in between. Like Azerbaijan believes that maybe it's not a middle power, because if middle power is Turkey and Israel, definitely Azerbaijan is far away. But also they hope that Azerbaijan is not a small state. And they believe that one of the channels to bring Azerbaijan closer to the position of middle power is try to lead the global south, or at least try to be vocal on global south issues and be perceived by global south countries, African countries, and other countries that Azerbaijan can mobilize them and somehow be a channel through which they may project their wishes, their concerns. From this perspective, I believe COP29 was more or less good for Azerbaijan. Of course, if you look into agreements, at the end of the day, summit was extended for another 36 hours, and they reached an agreement that every year the developed world will provide up to $300 billion support to developing countries to cope with climate change. Of course, Azerbaijan would like to see this number much bigger, because just before the start of COP29, there were speculations that the developing world needs at least 1 trillion per year. And there were hopes that maybe it will be possible to convince or force the developed world, or the so-called collective West, and the developed world of the Asia, countries of the Asia, to provide this $1 trillion per year to the developing countries. Maybe not too much realistic hope. So from this perspective, like actual result of the summit, I would say it was partly success, partly failure. But again, if we look from the perspective of making Azerbaijan as one of the leaders of global south, let's not forget that Azerbaijan for 3 years was the chair of this non-aligned movement. So this was another step by Azerbaijan to create an image that Azerbaijan is more than only a small post-Soviet country with usual problems of post-Soviet countries like authoritarianism, petrostate, and etc. Aliyev tries to show that Azerbaijan can be much more than simple, small post-Soviet country. And from this perspective, I think at least partly he achieved what he wanted.
What did Armenia get for agreeing to let COP29 take place in Baku?
Actually, only the release of 32 prisoners of wars, which came back to Armenia by the end of 2023. Because anything else, if government hoped, or maybe there were some at least oral agreements or initial understanding that Azerbaijan may be more flexible on peace agreement or may drop some of its preconditions to sign the peace agreement. They did not materialize, and even more, now Azerbaijan has 5 preconditions. 3, they were publicly put forward by Mr. Farid Shafiev, the director of Azerbaijani state think tank, AS Center, which is under presidential administration. And this is famous post in Mr. Farid Shafiev's X, former Twitter account, that A, Armenia should change its constitution and laws, B, that European Union observer mission should be kicked out from Armenia, C, Armenia should withdraw all legal cases against Azerbaijan, but also we have the precondition number 4, that Armenia should apply to OSCE with the suggestion to dissolve OSCE Minsk group, and E, the 5th precondition, despite Armenia and Azerbaijan agreed to move the issue of corridor and connectivity from peace agreement or from the text of peace agreement, but Azerbaijan did not agree or did not remove this issue from its agenda. And as far as I understand, Azerbaijan argues that yes, the issue of corridor should not be solved through peace agreement, but there should be signed a separate document on the issue of communications and corridors. And as far as the separate document is not signed, Azerbaijan is not going to sign peace agreement. So, making a long story short, Armenia received only 32 POWs, and instead of having more flexible Azerbaijani position on peace negotiations, now we have more hard position of Azerbaijan on peace negotiations, and as nothing was signed before COP29, despite a lot of hopes and some US efforts, now there is a mood that in the best case scenario, Armenia and Azerbaijan will enter and finish 2025 in this no war, no peace situation without no agreement. And in the worst case scenario, Azerbaijan may again use the force through small or mid or whatever scale escalations to force Armenia for concessions or to take more from Armenia.
Benyamin, Andrzej Duda is finishing his term as president of Poland, and as part of that ceremony, I guess, he was visiting the region. First, he was in Baku last week, I believe, or 2 weeks ago, and then he came to Yerevan. And as a president of an EU country, he went to visit the EU mission in Armenia, and that made Baku go bonkers. Basically, they took deep offense and slammed him for provocative, quote unquote, anti-Azerbaijani activities from a leader of a country that has a strategic partnership with Azerbaijan. So can you tell us what was this episode something special that we should be interested in, or was this just an expression of Azerbaijan's relationship towards the EUMA? Why did Azerbaijan get so upset, or why did Aliyev get so upset at Andrzej's visit to Yerevan?
I don't think that was something special. I think this is a part of this Azerbaijani policy of criticizing EU and especially EU mission for so-called binocular diplomacy. We know that Azerbaijan argues that when EU observers from Armenian side, they look with binocles towards Azerbaijan, they somehow joining Azerbaijani soldiers, and from Azerbaijani perspective, they are becoming part of Armenian soldiers and becoming like part of Armenian line of defense or whatever. But I don't believe this was something particular against Poland or something particular against Mr. Duda. At the end of the day, Duda visited Baku and took part in COP29. And we know that from European Union standards, Azerbaijan is an authoritarian country. Azerbaijan made ethnic cleansing and etc. etc. So in theory, Duda may say, no, I'm not going to COP29, and some Polish minister may visit Baku. So I don't think that Azerbaijan is completely unhappy with Duda, but because I think this is a part of the official line that EU observer mission was first deployed to Armenia through consultation with Azerbaijan. I speak about 2-month deployment, October, December 2022. And Azerbaijan's line is that EU should consult with Azerbaijan before launching this 2-year mission. So actually, Azerbaijan is sending a message that I am not against the mission per se, But I am not happy that mission was deployed along Armenia-Azerbaijan border, 2-year mission, without consulting with Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan tries to show that yes, this is Armenian territory, because every time when I personally hear the criticism from Azerbaijani experts during international conferences, when also EU experts and sometimes EU officials are sitting, and I hear this Azerbaijani criticism that, okay, we don't like EU mission along Armenia-Azerbaijan border, the Europeans, expert officials, they are telling that, look, but the mission is in sovereign territory of Armenia. Like, what the hell Azerbaijan has to do with this mission? Mission is deployed on sovereign territory of Armenia. So why the EU should consult Azerbaijan before launching this 2-year mission? And Azerbaijanis are saying, yes, mission is deployed on Armenian sovereign territory, but the mission is deployed on Armenia-Azerbaijan border, which means that this also deals with Azerbaijan, and you should consult with us before doing anything along our border. So by criticizing anyone who goes visit the mission headquarters in Yerevnador or take part in mission monitoring activities, Azerbaijan tries to send the message that what happens even in sovereign territory of Armenia, but close to Azerbaijani border, Azerbaijan should have, if not the power of a veto, at least Azerbaijan should be consulted. This is Azerbaijan's position, and probably this comes from their understanding that, okay, they won 2 wars against Armenia, 2020 and 2023, and it's interesting that despite Armenian government officially stated immediately after Azerbaijan started its offensive against Nagorno-Karabakh in September 2023, Armenia's government official position was that this is not Armenia's fight, and Armenia is not going to intervene in no way. But still, Azerbaijanis say, okay, we defeated Armenia 2 times in 2020 and 2023, and as a victorious country, we should have some right even to dictate what's happening along Armenia-Azerbaijan border, even if it's fully inside Armenia's sovereign territory. So I think this criticism against Andrzej Duda, and they even summoned Chargé of Poland in Azerbaijan, they summoned him to Azerbaijani Ministry of Foreign Affairs and protested. I don't think this is individually against Poland or individually against Mr. Duda. This is simply the official line that, okay, guys, anything which happened near our borders, even if it happens outside Azerbaijani sovereign territory, should be agreed with us. At least it relates to Armenia. That anything which happens in Armenian territory but close to Azerbaijani borders should be, if not de jure agreed, at least de facto discussed with Azerbaijan. And as one of Azerbaijani experts stated during one of the recent conferences, he said that we are not against EU mission, but we are against that EU mission is close to Azerbaijan's border. If EU mission will be deployed between, for example, Kotaik region and Yerevan, or Argazotan region and Shirak region of Armenia, and monitor these inter-regional administrative borders inside Armenia, we are absolutely okay. In that case, EU even may bring 1,000 monitors and let them monitor Yerevan, Hrazdan, Eshmiatin, and etc. But if anything happens in vicinity of Azerbaijan's border, even if it's in the territory, in the sovereign territory of Armenia, we should be consulted, and de facto we should provide our agreement. Why? Because again, they won 2 wars against Armenia, and they believe that Azerbaijan is now much more than a small state. Maybe not a middle power, but somewhere in between. Small state, middle power.
Yeah, so the term of the EU, Benjamin, expires in February, so just a few months. And we know that Azerbaijan has been lobbying for the termination of the mission. And it seems like the Armenian government, at least through Pashinyan, they signaled that they would be ready to remove the mission from the areas of the border that have been jointly demarcated. What do you think about the process of the renewal? Do you think that Armenia will renew the mission? Because we haven't heard anything yet so far.
First of all, it's not Armenia, but the EU should renew the mission. But according to my understanding, Armenia has already applied for the EU to extend mission for another 2 years. And at the technical level, decision was made that mission will be extended for another 2-year term until February 2027. But the final political decision will be adopted somewhere between mid-December 2024 and mid-January 2025. And regarding Armenia's government position that, okay, we can pull away mission from areas which are delimited or demarcated, okay, even if we believe that what happened in March, April, May 2024 was the legal delimitation and demarcation, or the delimitation and demarcation fully in line with international law, and I don't share this assessment, but even if we believe that, yes, now we have delimited border, delimitation done fully in line with international best practices, let's not forget that now we have only 12.7 kilometers of delimited border. Armenia-Azerbaijan border is more than 1,000 kilometers. I mean, border between Armenia and Azerbaijan proper and Armenia and Nakhichevan Autonomous Republic. So we have only 1% border delimited. So even if, for example, Armenia will say, okay, let's EU mission is not going for delimited areas of these 12.7 kilometers, then there are more than 1,000 kilometers where still mission will be deployed. And given that this process may take very long period, yes, Armenia and Azerbaijan agreed on regulation of this border delimitation and demarcation commission, and Armenian side even sent this regulation to the constitutional court, then it was ratified by parliament as a law, then it was signed as a law by the president of Armenia, while in Azerbaijan it was only confirmed by presidential decree, but still there is no agreement on what areas to continue. And of course, there are some areas which are not disputable, and there are a few hundred kilometers. This process may take place quicker, but again, quicker probably mean years. Let's not forget that Armenia-Georgia border is not delimited or is being delimited only by around 70 or 75%, while the process continues for more than 20 years. There are no territorial conflicts and disputes between Armenia and Georgia. So from this perspective, I mean, if we say, okay, at the end of the day, EU mission will fully remove them from Armenia when all more than 1,000 kilometer long border between Armenia and Azerbaijan will be delimited, demarcated, it will mean that the EU mission will stay in Armenia forever, because at least there are a few hundred kilometers of borders where Azerbaijani troops are inside Armenia's territory. At least they are inside Soviet Armenia's territory, which is part of internationally recognized Armenia's territory. And the what signals we hear from Azerbaijan, both at the expert level and from the officials' mouth, is Azerbaijan has zero intention to withdraw from those areas, which means that border delimitation and demarcation will never end. At least even after 10, 15, or 20 years from now, somewhere in 2044 or 2045, we will have few hundred kilometers when still Azerbaijani troops will be inside Armenian territory. Of course, if Armenia will not use military force to kick them out, but this is another discussion.
Right.
Which means that even EU mission will stay only for those to monitor those sections of border which are not delimited. It means that, again, from my perspective, it means that EU mission will remain in Armenia for decades and decades, because again, few hundred kilometers of border is not going to be delimited.
Benjamin, the so-called peace agreement that Pashinyan really wants to sign with Aliyev is turning out to be pretty elusive. There were reports that it would be even signed during COP29. At the same time, there were rumors that after COP29, Azerbaijan might start a new provocation. And this is also coming from the same people. It's coming from the foreign ministry of Pashinyan saying that Azerbaijan might start a new war after COP29. So, I mean, I think they're having a bipolar moment or something, but I wanted to ask you what you think about the current risk of new hostilities by Azerbaijan.
When we look what Azerbaijan is doing, I have a feeling, but not only the feeling, because feeling is like an emotional word. I have an assessment or estimate or perception that Azerbaijan, step by step, creates a case as a lawyer creates a case to protect the person whom he defends, the same way Azerbaijan, step by step, brick by brick, putting bricks over bricks, creates the case to justify the potential new escalation against Armenia. It does not mean, and no one, I believe, at least in Armenia, can say for sure that escalation is imminent. But again, Azerbaijan prepares the case, which means that at least Azerbaijan also does not exclude that he may escalate against Armenia. What I mean by telling that Azerbaijan prepares the case, as lawyer prepares his or her case. First, Azerbaijan is very actively, through expert circles, through official circles, circulates the idea that Armenia is preparing for revenge and Armenia is preparing to attack Azerbaijan. And they give two explanations for this. Explanation number one, like Prime Minister Pashinyan, because his ratings goes down and he faces elections either in 2025, if snap elections, or no later than mid-2026. He needs some small military victory somehow to overcome the humiliation of these military defeats in 2020, then in September 2022, then in September 2023. So Armenia prepares for revenge. Armenia prepares to attack Azerbaijan. A, for domestic political reasons, and B, they argue that some Western countries, first of all France, is arming Armenia and also convincing other countries to arm Armenia because France wants to transform Armenia into its proxy in South Caucasus, and France wants to use Armenia to attack Azerbaijan because France wants to harm Azerbaijan for whatever reasons. So, the one pillar of this case to justify potential future Azerbaijan escalations against Armenia, that Armenia itself prepares for attack. And then it's kind of the second argument. If Armenia has already made a decision to launch a new war against Azerbaijan, and even it's not too much important or significant for what reasons, domestic political reason, foreign manipulation or whatever, then it means, I'm speaking about Azerbaijan in not logic, but I'm speaking about how Azerbaijan presents the case. So they try to send a message to international community that the war is inevitable because Armenia has already made a decision to start the war against Azerbaijan. So war is inevitable because Armenia's choice, like Armenia choose to start the new war. Then they put the second argument. As the war is inevitable, and as Armenia has already made the decision to start a new war against Azerbaijan, but he needs few more years to receive all the weapons for which he signed contracts with different countries, then it's simply stupid for Azerbaijan to sit, wait, and see how Armenia becoming stronger, and then attack Azerbaijan. So if Armenia inevitably will attack Azerbaijan, let's assume in 2027 or 2028, after receiving all weapons for which he signed contracts, then the only way for Azerbaijan to prevent Armenia's attack, or at least to prevent significant damage to Azerbaijan by Armenia's attack a few years later, when Armenia will become stronger, the only way is to launch so-called preventive or preemptive strike. Now, or in the near future, before Armenia will receive all weapons for which he signed contracts. So, if you look into Azerbaijani expert statements, interviews, and the so-called analytical materials in Azerbaijani media, which is very strongly connected with presidential administration or with Azerbaijani Ministry of Defense, you will see the growing number of articles within this logic. Armenia chose a new war. Armenia decided to take Azerbaijan, but Armenia will do it later when it will become stronger. So if Azerbaijan is not stupid, Azerbaijan should not wait until Armenia becomes stronger and attack Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan should attack now because as Armenia is weaker, to significantly harm Armenia and prevent any possibility of Armenia launching any attack against Azerbaijan for the next 10 or 15 years. So I see this type of discussions very actively, and this type of messaging goes also to the international community, and they send two messages. First, it's Armenia who choose to start the new war, and B, Azerbaijan is forced to launch preemptive strikes. So the final argument, if new war between Armenia and Azerbaijan starts, and even Azerbaijan starts a war, this is because of Armenia who choose to start the war later, and by doing so, forced Azerbaijan to launch preemptive or preventive strikes. So this is a narrative, and this is a case. Again, it does not mean that Azerbaijan will launch escalation, I don't know, by the end of 2024 or in early 2025. I'm not sure anyone in Armenia is able to give any concrete data, but what I'm able to do to say that Azerbaijan is preparing itself, Azerbaijan is preparing international community for the potential escalations. Will this escalation actually happen? Will Azerbaijan use this so-called case and then start escalations against Armenia, simultaneously telling everyone that, look, I warned you that everything is going to move through this direction, and this is because of Armenia? Let's see. Of course, Armenia and Azerbaijan, they don't locate it on the moon. So we have Russia, we have Iran, we have Turkey, we have regional players, global players, but let's see.
All right. I'm going to shift our attention a little bit to developments in the Middle East. This past Tuesday, Israel and Lebanon reached a ceasefire agreement. Despite dozens of Israeli violations of the agreement, for now it seems to have slowed down the hostilities and bombing of the towns and civilians in Lebanon. The day after the agreement, terrorists supported by Turkey, the so-called moderate Syrian opposition, went on a large-scale offensive in northern Syria. Syria's weakness draws both Russia and Iran into a new conflict where their interests would clash with Israel and Turkey. We've discussed that such efforts could distract Iran from defending its interests in the north, for example, Armenia's sovereignty over Syunik. Can the situation in and around Syria lead to a worsening of Turkish-Russian relations, Benyamin?
Very interesting question. First, I believe that what happened in Syria in last week, or at least in last few days, this was a result of at least Israel-Turkey agreement. Also, I don't exclude that somehow US was part of this agreement. I believe what happened had two strategic goals. First, to bring back situation in Syria to 2015-2016, before Assad, with the help of Russians and Iranians, took significant territories back. And we see that now really, if you compare the maps of Syria in, for example, mid-2016, before Syrian government troops took back Aleppo, and compare with the maps of December 1st, 2024, we will see that the maps are very equal. But the second goal was to de facto open the third front against Iran, because first front was Hamas, second was Hezbollah, and third front is now what's happening in Syria. So this is a clear strategy of overstretching Iranian forces. And also now Iran is in a very difficult position because according to several data, Iran was forced to redeploy some Hezbollah forces from Syria to Lebanon to take part of the war against Israel. So now, because a part of those forces are destroyed, Iran now is forced either to send some troops from Iranian territory or to use pro-Iranian military in Iraq to Syria. And according to several data, now there is a movement of pro-Iranian military from Iraq to Syria. But what does it mean? It means that now the weak point will become Iraq for Iran. And we cannot exclude that the next strike will be against pro-Iranian forces in Iraq. So we see the clear.
And there's even a rumor that actually the U.S. might help in that because it's very close to the U.S. They have a base there.
They have a base in the north of Iraq.
They have some. Yes, there are some special U.S. forces in Iraq and also in Syria, both in northeastern Syria, when they are deployed along Syrian Democratic Forces. These essentially Kurdish forces who helped the United States in the ground warfare against Islamic State in 2016, 2017, when they kicked out Islamic State from Palmyra or Deir Zor. And yes, US also have special forces in Iraq. But I think the key strategy is to create problems for Iran. Definitely, this is also complications for Russia, but I don't think that the key goal is to open the second front against Russia. We know that how much this issue of the second front was discussed, and even if you jump into Georgia's domestic political situation before the elections, the main slogan of Georgian Dream was that you should vote for us because if opposition comes, then the US, NATO, or EU, or as Georgian Prime Minister was stating about global party of war, they will force Georgia to open the second front against Russia. So this was a lot of discussions that the United States or the collective West would like to open the second front against Russia. But I'm not sure that the main goal of this offensive in Syria was the opening of second front against Russia. Of course, if the rebels will not reach naval base in Tartus or Russian air base in Khmeimim. Because if they reach there and if they threaten, then Russia should definitely deploy forces to Syria. As of now, Russia only uses its military jets deployed in Khmeimim to strike these terrorists or partly partly rebels who now almost control entire Aleppo, not only Sita, but also the Aleppo region, and then try to come a little bit south to take Hama, but then they were stopped near the city of Hama. But as far as I understand, Russia only sent 2-3 generals to Syria, maybe to support Syrian army or to lead the operations, but we don't see any redeployment of Russian troops to Syria. And as far as these terrorists or rebels or joint forces of various groups, they are not threatening either Tartus, Russian naval base, or Khmeimim, Russian military base. I don't believe we may say that the strategic goal of this operation was to open the second front against Russia. Regarding Russia-Turkey relations, again, the key loser here is Iran. And it's very complicated because even if you look into Russia-Iranian relations in Syria, yes, they had joint activities to save the Syrian regime because Iran needs pro-Iranian Syria to be able to use Syrian territory to reach Lebanon, to transfer weapons to Hezbollah, and definitely Russia needs pro-Russian somehow or anti-Western Syria to have the military presence in the Mediterranean. I'm speaking about this Tartus base, naval base, and also this air base in Khmeimim. But besides that, there was also a lot of contradictions between Russia and Iran. A lot of contradictions in Syria between Russia and Iran. There are a lot of reports, research reports, or even books written in the last 8-9 years about deep problems or contradictions between Russia and Iran. So from this perspective, it's even very challenging to argue that the significant weakening of Iran, maybe this is not catastrophic for Russia. So it's complicated. Like weakening of Assad is bad for Russia. But some sort of weakening of Iran, maybe not so bad for Russia.
We're probably going to have a conversation about those differences between Iran and Russia at some point because they also affect Armenia deeply, clearly. One quick question, Benyamin. If this is actually more of a front against Iran rather than Russia, Israel alone could not confront Iran all by itself. It probably needs to draw the United States in. So how do you think a Trump administration would behave in a situation like this?
As even American experts are telling, no one knows what Trump will do because he's too much unpredictable. But if I will make a bet, I think Trump will come back to his policy of maximum pressure against Iran, which he launched in May 2018, immediately after withdrawing or pulling out the US from nuclear deal. So most probably we will see more pressure on Iran, potentially also military pressure via Israel or via these pro-Turkish groups in Syria. But I'm not sure that Trump would like to have a regime change in Iran. Maybe Trump's key goal is to force Iran to negotiate and sign new agreement, like to replace JCPOA with new agreement, which from Trump's perception will be more favorable for the United States and less favorable for Iran. So, but in any case, regardless of the final goal, is this a to sign new agreement, which I believe it is, or maybe this is the idea is a regime change, but for regardless the final goal, I think Trump will significantly increase pressure on Iran, and as I mentioned, Trump probably will come back to its maximum pressure against Iran policy, which definitely is not a good news for Armenia. Because, as also you mentioned, this may restrict further Iran's ability to influence geopolitics of the South Caucasus.
Shifting attention to Georgia, post-election Georgia is seeing mounting unrest led by President Salome Zourabichvili, who rejects the re-election results from a month ago and wants them annulled. In the past week, some of the demonstrations bordered on violence as the new parliament set the date for the next presidential election to December 14, 2024. Now, this election would end up replacing Zourabichvili. Benyamin, how do you see the situation in Georgia developing? Can Zourabichvili prevent Georgian Dream from holding presidential elections and hold on to her seat?
First, I believe Prime Minister Kobakhidze made a mistake when on November 28, immediately after being re-elected by Georgian parliament, he himself stated that Georgian Dream will move away the opening of negotiations with the EU from its foreign policy priority list until 2028. Because let's be very clear, despite all efforts of opposition forces, these four opposition blocs who entered the parliament, despite all their efforts, there were no mass protests in Georgia. Zero mass protests in Georgia. Even on the day when the parliament convened its first session, November 25, less than 1,000 people were protesting in front of parliament building. And everyone was sure that, yes, maybe part of society is not happy with election results, but they understood that game is over. And then suddenly, for whatever reasons, maybe as an answer to the European Parliament resolution, again adopted on November 28, Mr. Kobakhidze stated publicly that, okay, we will not receive any budget loans from the European Union. And again, as I mentioned, the negotiations for EU accession will not be our foreign policy priority list, at least until 2028. So this triggered significant unrest in Georgia because November 25, less than 1,000 people protesting against the first session of new elected parliament. Already in the evening of November 28, 2 hours after Mr. Kobakhidze's statement, up to 7,000, mostly young people like teenagers, 15, 16, 17, up to 25, 30, but mostly from 15 to 25, 7,000 people protested in front of Parliament building. Then on Friday evening, it was maybe 10,000, Saturday evening, even more, and protests became more violent. And then we see some resignations in Ministry of Foreign Affairs, including a deputy minister, some ambassadors, including Georgian ambassador in the United States, which itself was a Ministry of Foreign Affairs under Georgian Dream from 2018 until 2022. Now we see that some universities are joining the protests. The President Salome Zourabichvili is calling school children to join the protests. I'm not in a position to say that like there is Georgia is 5 minutes away from revolution, but situation is shaky now. And again, all started after Mr. Kobakhidze made his statement.
Yeah, he probably did not need to make those statements, especially because the EU itself has frozen the relations, the talks.
At the end of the day, the statement could be made by another person. This is my conviction. If, for example, the chairman of Parliament Foreign Affairs Committee, or for example, deputy foreign minister will make the same statement, this will not trigger the protest. But it appears that when fire was very close to be completely calmed down, then Mr. Kobakhidze took a gasoline and poured into the fire. And now he and his government are struggling, and now it's difficult to say what may happen next. And this is a bet for Armenia, because regardless who is going to control Georgia, Armenia needs stable, secure, and prosperous Georgia. But now, as we see that also there are protests in some cities, and there are calls that let's close highways and etc. This may also impact Armenia's import-export activities. Let's not forget that 70% of Armenia's trade with external world passes through Georgia via land to Russia, then via Black Sea with Europe, with Asia, and other countries. And Also, I don't see any political way to overcome this crisis because according to Georgia's constitution, I believe, you cannot dissolve parliament for the first 6 months of state elections. So legally, no one can dissolve the parliament until May 2025. Also, the government is approved by parliament. So, and president is telling that because parliament is not legitimate, I will not accept the newly elected president who was offered by Georgian Dream. So there is a danger of even parallel authority in Georgia when Salome Zourabichvili can continue, she can continue to call herself as a president, and some state institutions or part of state institution may say, okay, we recognize Salome Zourabichvili as a president, but I'm afraid that there is a significant risk of long-term political instability because even if government resigns, that who is going to organize new elections? And let's not forget that a lot of people support Georgian Dream. A lot of people still hate United Nations movement and Mr. Saakashvili. So this may end in a long-term political instability, and I'm afraid theoretically even can reach to some large-scale clashes between different parts of society, not only between government and protesters, but also different part of society, which again, from Armenia's perspective, is a worst scenario which may happen in Georgia. But to say what will happen, I'm not sure that anyone can say, even in Georgia. But yes, there is a situation is in flux, and there is a danger that it will become more unstable, and Georgia may jump into long-term political and even economic instability with significant negative impact on Armenia.
Benjamin, besides unrest in Georgia itself, a few months ago there was unrest in Abkhazia, and the situation there got resolved with the resignation of the president and the vice president taking a caretaker government, essentially taking control of a caretaker government. I think that what we want to focus on, we had a detailed discussion with Archil Sikharulidze in the previous episode. I believe it's 388, if I'm not mistaken. From an Armenian perspective, you mentioned the Stepan Sminda Lars Pass, the mountainous pass, which is closed some of the time because of weather or sometimes even because of repairs. It's a single point of failure for Armenia, and it's the only way that Armenia can export and import goods from its strategic partner, Russia. So this is a strategic interest for us. And we were hoping, I think Armenian leadership and Armenian elite are hoping that as part of this rapprochement between Georgia and Russia, or as part of a future rapprochement, we don't know if there is a current rapprochement, but as part of a future rapprochement between Georgia and Russia, the Abkhaz Railway could be reopened to Georgia so that Armenia could use that. What scenarios do you see for the railway in Abkhazia being opened to Armenia? Obviously, if Georgian Dream goes away, I think Archil said that we can forget about that. But even if Georgian Dream stays, what scenarios would allow for the reopening of the Abkhaz Railway?
I'm not too much optimistic about near future opening of Abkhaz Railway, even if Georgian Dream remains in power. Fully agree with Archil that if through whatever scenarios Georgian Dreams moves away and this more pro-Western or anti-Russian people comes to power, definitely we should forget about Abkhazian Railway at all. And I don't exclude that at that time maybe there will be even some destabilization along these administrative borders or real borders between Georgia and Abkhazia and Georgia and South Ossetia Tskhinvali region. But even if Georgian Dream remains in power, there were some initial discussions or speculations that maybe Georgia and Russia can come to terms regarding South Ossetia Tskhinvali region, given that, okay, it's only a very small territory, very small population. During winters, like 25, 27,000 people remains in South Ossetia, during summers up to 40,000. So maybe Russia and Georgia may agree somehow to bring back this territory within Georgian legal space, but no one hopes that this may happen with Abkhazia, given the strategic importance of Abkhazia for Russia. It's a Black Sea, and we know that part of Russian Black Sea fleet is now coming back to Abkhazia. There are plans, or at least discussions, to construct a new naval base in Abkhazia, which means that probably Russia will never agree to denounce the recognition of Abkhazia's independence. And as far as de jure, or at least from the Georgian perspective, Abkhazia is a Russia's occupied territories. it's quite challenging to see any scenario when Georgia will say, yes, Abkhazia is occupied by Russia, but I'm ready to use Abkhazian territories. Especially, I don't believe that Georgia needs this railway. Because look, if we speak about Georgia playing a transit country, even connecting Iran with Europe or even India with Europe via this India, Iran, Armenia, Georgia, Black Sea route, so-called Persian Gulf Black Sea Transport Corridor, and India joining this Persian Gulf Black Sea Transport Corridor, they don't need Russia because Georgia will connect Iran or India via Iran to Europe via its Black Sea port of Poti and Batumi. And if this new port will be constructed in Anaklia by Chinese companies, or if Georgian Dream moves away, then probably the tender will be cancelled and Americans will construct this Anaklia. But still, why Georgia needs this railway connection? Okay, Georgia is exporting to Russia directly via land, and to say that, okay, Georgia can compete for this international north-south corridor route, India, Iran, Azerbaijan, Russia, through highway or railway, and to say, okay, but this may work also India, Iran, Armenia, Georgia, Russia by railway, but let's not forget that there is no Armenia-Iran railway. Of course, Armenia may use railway and connect with Iran via Nakhichevan, I mean Julfa, Nakhichevan, Yerevan, Yerevan railway, but still you have Azerbaijan, and if at the end of the day you will pass through Azerbaijan, then you can pass also directly via Iran, Azerbaijan, Russia. Why to come to choose Iran, Nakhichevan, Armenia, Georgia, Russia? So from this perspective, I don't see urgent need from Georgian perspective for opening Abkhazian railway. It's mostly needed for Armenia and it's mostly needed for Russia to have direct access to Armenia and to be connected with Armenia. And again, not with Iran, because we do not have any railway connecting Armenia and Iran directly, circumventing Nakhichevan. So I'm not very much optimistic of opening up Abkhazian railway in near future. Near future, I mean like 1, 2, 3, 4 years.
Do you think that also for Turkey and Azerbaijan, this could be an issue where they try to influence this outcome? Because even let's say if Georgian Dream agrees, we know that Azerbaijan is talking about opening up transport corridors, but in reality, all of its moves are geared towards blockading Armenia even more. So I was wondering, even if they open the railway to Abkhazia, it could be connected to the Baku-Tbilisi-Kars railway and not fully all the way down south to Armenia. Although I don't know what basis they would use to influence Georgia to do that. But do you see any potential for that scenario?
I would agree that opening of Abkhazian railway and the relaunch of direct rail connection between Armenia and Russia via Georgia or via Abkhazia, this is bad for Azerbaijan. Probably this is bad for Turkey. So they will try to use the economic or political influence of Georgia, and Azerbaijan has economic influence of Georgia. Azerbaijan supplies gas to Georgia, so Georgian Dream somehow changed the situation. For example, in 2024, only 70% of gas consumed in Georgia was supplied from Azerbaijan, and Georgia bought 30% of its gas from Russia. But still, Azerbaijan has significant economic influence in Georgia. Turkey has significant influence in Georgia through its investments. So definitely the opening of Armenia-Russia railway via Georgia, this is a bad news for Azerbaijan and Turkey, and they will try to use whatever leverage they have on Georgia to prevent this. But frankly speaking, I'm not sure that they will need to do that, because as I mentioned, I don't see how or why Georgian Dream or any Georgian government will agree to relaunch the Abkhazian railway while Abkhazia, at least from Georgian perspective, will be under Russia's occupation, and I don't see why and how Russia will denounce its recognition of Abkhazia's independence and will agree to reunite Abkhazia with Georgia.
We moved a lot regionally from the Middle East to Iran to Georgia, but also I think we should cover Armenia's relationship with Russia, which is showing no signs of improvement. And news last week essentially confirmed that. Just some of the things that happened were last week. Armenia once again refused to attend the CSTO summit, which took place, I believe, Kazakhstan. So Armenia essentially refused once again to attend the CSTO summit. What's even worse is that the EA-EU summit, which was expected to be held in Yerevan this year because Armenia is holding the rotating chairmanship of the EU this year, it was announced that the summit itself would be moved to Moscow. Then Pashinyan told Armenian public TV that he might support efforts to have a referendum on joining the EU. So yet another fuel in the fire for on those anti-Russian efforts. And lastly, in the duration of 10 days, the Russian External Intelligence Service, the SVR, published two documents on Armenia. In one of them, it was saying that the US is promoting pro-Western parties in Armenia, the so-called pro-EU camp. And then another one claimed that US is pushing Armenia to commit national suicide. We all remember the talk that Armenia should start preparing to get more rice so that we can eat rice instead of wheat. Essentially, over the past few months, some Armenian commentators were saying that Armenia could start making overtures towards improving the Russian relationship a little bit because they were feeling that the pendulum had swung too much towards, against Russia. But it seems like Pashinyan is in no mood to do that. How do you see the trajectory of the Armenian-Russian relations?
Actually, this may sound a little bit strange, but I believe the last statement of Russian Foreign Intelligence Service that the West is trying to organize a pro-Western camp with these four parties to support them to enter the next parliament and to use them as a leverage against Pashinyan to prevent Pashinyan any efforts of Pashinyan to somehow calm down this Western-focused diversification, or I believe even they mentioned to prevent Pashinyan becoming next Georgian Dream, like trying to recalibrate its foreign policy. My understanding is that it may sound strange, but this is somehow pro-Pashinyan statement, because it means that from Russian perspective, if there are no other alternatives, then Pashinyan sitting in the chair of prime minister is probably, as of now, the best option for Russia, because other alternatives are even worse. So because from this statement, I understood that from Russian perspective, Pashinyan is better than more pro-Western powers. And they are warning Pashinyan that, look, West maybe will kick you out to bring more pro-Western people, which can be interpreted that maybe Russia is not happy with Pashinyan, but Russia understands that there are no better alternative for Russia. Like my understanding or my reading of this statement was that any alternative to Pashinyan will be worse for Russia than Pashinyan himself, which means that if Pashinyan remains in power as a result of either snap elections or non-snap elections in 2026, this is not bad for Russia. This is my interpretation of that statement. Regarding the future of Armenian-Russia relations, I think much depends on US-Russia understanding or agreement on Ukraine. And this is my conviction that if there is an understanding on Ukraine, it will not cover only Ukraine. It will cover broader issues, including Russia-China strategic partnership and including Russia's role and influence and US engagement in former Soviet space. So if understanding is reached, and as I mentioned, this covers also former Soviet space, probably US agreeing that the former Soviet space is a somehow zone of Russia's special interest and Russia should have some flexibility, then I believe many countries in the post-Soviet space, including in Central Asia and South Caucasus, including Azerbaijan and definitely Armenia, will be forced to accommodate to Russia and somehow make adjustments in their foreign policies. Of course, there are speculations that a more powerful, revengeful, and more assertive Russia will come to Central Asia and South Caucasus and will kick out political elites, telling them, oh, you betrayed me or you try to exploit my perceived weakness, but now I'm come back and I will punish you and will deprive you from power. I don't believe that this is too close to reality. It's like too much Hollywood movies. But again, I think leadership of post-Soviet space, I speak at least about Central Asia and South Caucasus. Okay, Belarus is fully or almost fully integrated with Russia. Ukraine, there is a war, and Moldova is close to Europe also geographically, and half of Moldovan citizens have Romanian passports, so they are de facto already citizens of the EU. But Central Asia and South Caucasus, the political leadership will be forced, do they want, or they don't want, they will be forced to make adjustments in their foreign policy and somehow accommodate Russia. And this also applies to Armenia. What will it mean in reality? Okay, here we may speculate, starting that, I don't know, Russia may demand Armenia to cancel the EU mission. Russia may demand from Armenia to fully come back to CSTO, to defreeze its membership into CSTO. Russia may demand from Armenia to cancel its strategic dialogue with the United States, which was launched officially in 2019. And we can also go further and speculate what does it mean. Armenia's leadership will be forced to somehow readjust or accommodate its policy toward Russia, or maybe it will mean completely different things. But again, this depends on potential understanding or not understanding between the United States and Russia on Ukraine and other broader issues.
Yeah, and we were going to ask you if this push to have a referendum on EU membership, do you believe that this is also instigated by the West, or do you believe that pro-EU forces in Armenia could really use this topic to generate political conversations and to generate political movement without the EU's or West's approval? And if not, then do you think that this topic will also be part of the Russian and Western negotiations, assuming they do happen? Because we see that a lot of Armenians have this unreasonable expectation that they're going to join the EU. And now we're seeing even Georgia is basically backtracking on that.
Frankly speaking, I don't believe that this potential EU accession referendum in Armenia will be part of any serious talks between anyone, because this is not a serious issue to be part of the serious talks. I believe all understand that Armenia can make referendums on anything, joining EU, joining NATO, I don't know, joining any other organization. Armenia even may make a referendum to become a permanent member of the UN Security Council. Okay, you are a country, you are free to do whatever referendums you want. But all understand that Armenia is far away from becoming EU member. I would say far, far away. Just look into the Western Balkans or Turkey, or at least, okay, Turkey is a different case, Muslim country, etc. But the Western Balkans, more than 10 years, no enlargement, and also see what's happening inside EU. I mean, inside different countries, economic crisis in France, in Germany, the rise of relatively right or far-right forces who are also against any immigration, any enlargement. Okay, given all this, I think Armenia is far, far, far away from EU. All understand this. So frankly speaking, I don't believe that this is somehow pushed by EU or by the United States. Let's make a referendum, because all understand that this referendum will change nothing. But what this may change, this referendum, regardless of the results, especially if the result is a positive, can be used by these pro-Western / anti-Russian forces to use this as a good slogan or as a good launchpad for the start of election campaign for either snap or non-snap parliamentary elections. And even I can imagine like a very good election slogan, come back to Europe, or let's go to Europe, or together with Europe, or whatever. And given the significant increase of anti-Russian sentiments and also rise of pro-Western sentiment, I think any coalition of pro-Western, pro-EU / anti-Russian forces definitely have a chance to overcome this 5 or I believe 4% threshold. My understanding is that in 2026, threshold will be 4%, not 5, and they can take up to 10% of votes. And they can have an influence in parliament, or even in theory, become a coalition member for civil contract, if civil contract fails to get absolute majority as it did in 2021. So again, I don't think this will be part of any serious international negotiations, because at least I hope that in serious international negotiations, serious issues are being discussed, but this can be part in Armenian domestic politics.
Okay, let's leave it there for today. Thank you, Benyamin, for joining us. We appreciate your time.
Thank you, Benjamin.
Thank you, Asbed. Thank you, Hovik. It's always a pleasure.
That was our Weekend Review show recorded on December 2nd, 2024. We've been talking with Dr. Benyamin Poghosyan, who is a senior fellow at APRI Armenia, a Yerevan-based think tank And he's also the chairman of the Center for Political and Economic Strategic Studies. For more information on Benyamin and everyone else participating in this episode, check out our show notes at podcasts.groong.org/episode number. I'm Asbed Bedrossian.
And this is Hovik Manucharyan.
Please follow us on social media and follow us everywhere you get your Armenian news. The links are in the show notes. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you soon.